A tax freight train is bearing down on your retirement. To protect yourself, you'll have to harness the power of zero.
Hi there, this is David McKnight. Welcome to the Power of Zero show. Glad you're with us for another week. As I'm the best-selling author of The Power of Zero, Look Before You LIRP, The Volatility Shield, and coming out in November, Tax-Free Income for Life. Looking forward to that rollout. And of course, you can go to Amazon or wherever you buy books and order the book. Take your receipt number, input it into a field where it says redeem my free chapter over at davidmcknight.com, and you can download chapter 1 immediately. So hope that you have taken advantage of that. Many of you have. For those of you who haven't, why not head on over to davidmcknight.com and start to get a flavor for what that book can do. I'm touting this book as the grand unified theory when it comes to retirement planning. It really connects all of the dots for you, and it is, I think, going to be an amazing follow-up to The Power of Zero. If you are looking for an advisor that can help get you to the 0% tax bracket, help you mitigate tax rate risk and longevity risk, all within the same financial plan, head over to davidmcknight.com. And if you are an advisor who wants to learn how to do that, you can head over to powerofzero.com. All right, today I'm excited about what we're going to talk about. Really, the main thrust of what we're going to talk about is the 5 things that your LIRP must have if you are going to have it for the rest of your life. Many of you have read my book, Look Before You LIRP, in which I compare having an LIRP to getting married. And I know that many of you listening did not get married on the first date. In fact, you had a laundry list of things you were looking for in a spouse. And as you were out on the dating scene, you went through the mental checklist. Does this person have the types of things I'm looking for? Because you don't want to get 10 years into a marriage and realize that your spouse has significant skeletons in their closet that, had you known to look for them at the outset, you may not have taken that leap, as it were. So the same thing holds true for a life insurance policy, particularly an LIRP, that there are a number of things that should be on your laundry list of things you're looking for in LIRP. You don't want to get 10 or 20 or 30 years into it and realize that there's a ticking time bomb inside your LIRP that, had you known to look for it, you would have not taken that leap, as it were. Some of the things I'm going to be talking about today come right out of my book, Look Before You LIRP. I'm going to talk about 5 of those things because I think that's about what we have time for. There are quite a few more that I talk about in the book, but this is just a reprisal of what you really need to keep in mind when you are going to tie the knot when it comes to an LIRP. The first thing that I like to talk about is having a guaranteed 0% loan. Now, let's do a quick review on how you're able to take money out of an LIRP tax-free. First of all, you're allowed to withdraw whatever dollars you contributed to the policy. You're allowed to withdraw those tax-free at your leisure because those are after-tax dollars. You can take them out tax-free, no problem. Simply a return of your principal. What we're talking about is, how do you get money out of your policy that's above and beyond the basis, above and beyond what you've put into it? And you do that by way of a loan. Now, let me explain to you in rough terms how this works. When you take a loan out of your life insurance policy, you're not actually taking a loan from the policy itself. You're using the policy as collateral for a loan that you're actually taking from the life insurance company themselves. And the IRS says that if someone's going to lend you money, whether it be your uncle, your bank, your life insurance company, what have you, in order for it to be what's called an arm's length transaction, there has to be a rate of interest attached to that loan. So let's say you've got $1 million in your LIRP and you decide you want $100,000. You call up your life insurance company and say, hey, look, I want to take a $100,000 loan from my policy. So they say, okay, we will cut you a check for $100,000. That's what you get in the mail a few days later. And in the very same breath, they will charge you 3%, just maybe, let's pick that number for now, 3% for that loan, okay? In the very same breath, they will take $100,000 out of the growth portion of your portfolio and put that into what I call a loan collateral account. And that loan collateral account is assigned a credit. Now, what some companies will do is they'll say, hey, I'll charge you 3 on the one hand, but I'll credit you back 2 on the other, in which case you have what's called a 1% net cost of borrowing. And that doesn't seem like a big deal, but as I outlined in Look Before You LIRP, it's a really big deal because that 1% compounds over time and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you don't pay back the loan, it gets bigger, it snowballs, and before you know it, you bankrupt your policy 10 years before you anticipate it. So some companies will say, okay, we will credit you the same amount that we charge you. So if we charge you 3% and we credit you 3%, it's what we call a wash loan. But then in the back of their mind, and maybe in some jargon in the policy, they'll say, but we reserve the right to change that 3% charge to a 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 at our leisure, in which case you don't really have a guaranteed 0% loan. So you give an insurance company long enough to make up their mind whether they want to charge you 0 or something greater. Trust me, if it's not guaranteed in the contract, they will ultimately end up charging you more. So that's why I insist on whatever LIRP that I'm going to be married to and ride off into the sunset with. I insist that the word guarantee be used in the contract. So for example, if they say we are going to credit you 3%, I want that to be a guarantee. I want them to guarantee that they're going to credit me 3%. If they're going to charge me 3%, I want them to guarantee that they will charge me 3%. Guess what? If they guarantee that they will always charge you 3% and they guarantee that they will always credit you back 3% to your policy loan collateral account, the net cost to you is always going to be 0%. So that loan is going to accumulate over your retirement. The loan collateral account will accumulate over retirement. Those two things will pay each other off. They'll reconcile at death. And all is that you asked for $100,000 all those years, you got $100,000 all those years, and you didn't have to pay tax on it because it was a loan. And the loan collateral account pays off the loan at death. No harm, no foul. It all works out well. So the caveat here is just because someone says that they are giving you a 0% loan doesn't mean it's guaranteed. So you have to be a detective. You have to be a sleuth. You have to pore over the policy and say, okay, are they guaranteeing the charge and are they guaranteeing the credit? And if so, I know that I can sleep at night knowing. And by the way, that's one of the most important provisions in the entire contract, okay? All right, second thing I'm looking for is interest in arrears, not interest in advance. So in other words, let me see if I can try to explain this in layman's terms. When you ask for your 0% loan, they can either charge you the interest up front, that 3%, they'll take that 3% out of your cash value up front, and then they'll credit it back to you at the end of the year. That's the first way of doing it. That's called interest in advance. The problem with interest in advance is you're taking that 3% out of the policy at the beginning of the year. So it's missing out on what we call it, it's creating what we call an opportunity cost. It's not going to experience the benefit of being in that policy or in that growth or in that loan collateral account over the course of the year. So technically you don't really have a guaranteed 0% loan. There's some opportunity costs. So you're going to have a slightly positive loan charge over the course of the year. So that's something that you also have to pour over your contract to see if that's what you really have. Interest in arrears is the way to go. Now, there's one instance of a company, it's actually a company I quite like, the amount that they charge you is slightly higher than the amount that they credit you is slightly higher than what they charge you. So even though they are crediting you on the back end, okay, and they're charging you up front, the amount that they end up crediting you more than makes up for what they charge you and the opportunity cost that you experience along the way. So there are very rare instances where interest in advance works out okay and can actually even work out in your favor to the point where if the amount that they are crediting you is high enough, then it's almost like they paid you a loan. They paid you money to take the loan over the course of the year. So there's only one instance that I've seen of that where interest in advance is okay. Otherwise, you want to avoid interest in advance because it's not a true 0% loan. The third thing I'm looking for in an LIRP that I'm going to be married to for the rest of my life is a strong financial rating. Now, I got to warn you, there's a number of different ratings out there that it's hard to know what to make of them. So the 4 most common rating companies are AM Best, Moody's, S&P, and Fitch. and they might give you a double A plus rating or a double A rating. And there's all sorts of different alphabet soups that they give you in terms of how they rate your company. And it's hard to know which of those companies to really put stock in, because sometimes their ratings will diverge wildly in terms of how they look at a particular company. So I tend to not look at those companies when it comes to determining the financial footing of a given company. What I prefer to look at is a Comdex rating. Now, let me show you how a Comdex rating works. You can get anywhere from 1 to 100. And actually, it might be 0 to 100. And it works a little bit like those tests that your kids took back in school, where you come home and your kid says, "Hey, Mom, I'm in the 92nd percentile for reading." What does that mean? That means that they're better at reading than 92% of the other kids. Or I'm in the 95th percentile for math. That means they're in the top 5% when it comes to math. The Comdex rating works very, very similarly. So, for example, if you have a Comdex rating of 90, that means that relative to your peers, you are stronger than 90% of the peers that are out there. Okay, so that is a much better litmus test, if you ask me, as to the strength of the company. It's not this random measuring stick, but it's measured in comparison to the peers in the industry. I get really uneasy if a Comdex rating is below 90. Okay, so I think 90 is a threshold that you have to look at. And really, if you really want to feel like you got the cream of the crop, you want to be 95 or higher. And that puts you in the top 5% of all companies. So Comdex rating is really what you're looking for. You want a company that's financially stable, that's going to be able to weather all of the ups and downs and all of the ebbs and flows in the markets as you move forward. Because remember, this company's got to be around 40 years from now when you need it to be, so it can pay that death benefit or can pay that long-term care benefit in advance of your death. So this is something that financial stability is absolutely paramount when you're evaluating the LIRP that you're planning on riding off into the sunset with. The fourth thing that I think your LIRP must have is what we call an overloan protection rider. And let me explain why an overloan protection rider is so important. Remember, your cash value has to have at least $1 in it when you die in order for your death benefit to pay out. If your cash value runs out before you die, there are some pretty intense tax repercussions. All of the tax benefit that you received over the course of your life, in other words, all of the taxes that you got out of paying because of the special tax benefits of life insurance, all of those tax benefits that you experienced up to that point in your life, you would end up having to pay all at once, all in 1 year. You would get a 1099 from the insurance company saying, these are the tax benefits that you experienced over the course of the life of the policy, and now you got to pay tax on all of it. The key here is you got to have at least $1 in your cash value when you die in order to avoid that outcome. Now, what an overloan protection rider does is it says, hey, if through a combination of loans and or not robust enough performance in the growth portion of your policy, if your cash value descends low enough where the policy is in danger of going into a death spiral from which it never recovers, then they will send you a letter and say, hey, look, it may be time to exercise your overloan protection rider. And what they do at that point is they lower your death benefit way down such that the amount of cash that's sitting in your cash value will be enough to pay up the policy. In other words, if they pay up the policy, at that point, you wash your hands of that policy when it comes to taking cash out. They reduce that death benefit way down, and that death benefit is what goes to your heirs upon your death. Now, hopefully, the overloan protection rider is not something that ever needs to come into play, because in a perfect world, you can take cash out for the purpose of paying for discretionary expenses over the course of your retirement. You can spend your death benefit in advance of your death for the purpose of paying for long-term care. We're talking about in that extreme scenario where your policy underperformed or you took too much money out or what have you, you have this safety net in place that prevents you from ever receiving that 1099 that would force you to pay all those taxes all in 1 year. Now, there are different companies that have different stipulations, one of which is, for example, you may have to keep your policy in force for 15 years before that overloan protection rider could activate and come into play. And it's going to depend, it's going to change from company to company, but that is definitely something that needs to be part of the equation. And the number 5 thing that your LIRP absolutely must have is what we call a chronic illness rider. Now, a chronic illness rider is to be contrasted with a long-term care rider. A chronic illness rider allows you to get your death benefit in advance of your death for the purpose of paying for long-term care. And it doesn't cost you any money along the way. So you say, this is a great benefit, but how does the insurance company make money? What if the insurance company thinks I'm going to live till age 85, but I need the long-term care benefit at age 75? Doesn't that throw their underwriting tables off? It actually does. So if they were predicting you were going to die at 85 and you end up spending your death benefit in advance of your death, 10 years in advance of your death for the purpose of paying for long-term care, they need to be able to pay themselves somehow for paying out that death benefit prior to when they thought you were going to need it. And so what they do is they discount the amount that you receive for long-term care. So let's say, for example, that you have a $400,000 death benefit and you want to receive 25% of that death benefit because you need long-term care. They'll send you $100,000, but that $100,000 will be discounted based on the age in which you receive the benefit. Now, it won't be discounted necessarily that much. It might be discounted at 10%, for example. But the point is, you're not going to get all $100,000. They're going to discount it on the back end. Now, this is preferred. I much prefer this to the alternative. The alternative is what we call a long-term care rider. Now, with a long-term care rider, you are paying money along the way for the privilege of receiving 25% of your death benefit in advance of your death per year for the purpose of paying for long-term care. Now, the reason I don't like long-term care riders is because if you pay for that long-term care rider throughout your entire retirement and die peacefully in your sleep, never having needed long-term care, guess what? All of those expenses were a drag on your cash value along the way. So you will end up having paid for something that you hoped you never had to use. And that's going to end up being a source of heartburn for you because you paid for something you hoped you never have to use. The reason why a chronic illness rider is to be preferred in my mind is that if you die peaceful in your sleep 30 years from now, never having needed long-term care, your kids get your death benefit and you haven't experienced any opportunity costs along the way. You haven't paid any money to the insurance company all the way. You haven't experienced that drag on your cash value along the way. So those are the 5 things that your LIRP must have, and that's what we have time for today. If you want to dig into this more, I suggest that you read Look Before You LIRP, where I really get into a few more attributes that your LIRP must have. And if you really want to get down to the nitty gritty, there's actually over 20 things that your LIRP must have, not all of which I think are interesting enough to talk about in a podcast. But these are the real 5 ones that you got to home in on. And by the way, I've had people say, they send me emails and they'll say, Dave, I've read Look Before You LIRP and I'm looking through the policy that I just purchased and it doesn't have any of the things that you're talking about. And they'll send me big, long copies of the policy that they just purchased and with excerpts from my book positioned at strategic points in that copy of the policy. And they'll say, look, it doesn't line up in any of the ways. And they'll say, gosh, Dave, I wish I'd read your book beforehand because now I'm stuck with this policy. I'm married to a policy that I don't want to be married to. And if I try to get out of it, it's going to be expensive. There's going to be surrender charges, so on and so forth. So the best thing to do is just to make sure your policy has all of the important attributes that a life insurance policy that checks all the boxes so that you don't experience that heartburn somewhere down the road. Again, if you're looking for someone to help you navigate all this, head over to davidmcknight.com. We're happy to hook you up with a qualified Power of Zero advisor. And if you are an advisor who's looking to transition your practice to a Power of Zero style practice, head over to powerzero.com. Don't forget to subscribe to my podcast. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's @McKnightNCo, @McKnightNCo. We'll talk to you same time next week.